Hi folks, welcome to today's podcast. I'm coming at you live from London. I'm still broadcasting from home as my podcast studio is still not open at the moment. So you will be hearing my dogs barking in the background today. I hope that it's worth that, putting up with that noise. There we go, a demonstration. To hear from my amazing guest today. I just before I tell you a little bit about the guest and bring my first guest on, Ray, who's in the waiting room, I just want to remind you all why we do this. We're here to help, Bella, come here. We're here to help 1 million people start a business of their own and ensure that anyone that does start a business doesn't feel alone doing it. And so we have built a series of platforms and events, webinars, insights, and people like Ray, my guest today, who come on and share their knowledge to help you not feel alone if you are running a business today and get the knowledge you need, as well as anyone out there that thinks, hey, I can't get a job. Don't worry about getting a job. Start a business of your own, create your own job. And by listening to people like Ray today, hopefully you'll get the knowledge to do that. Just before I bring Ray on, I'll also mention that I interviewed Jeff Rottmeyer yesterday. He's an incredible purpose-driven entrepreneur. He's running 2 charities. He's the CEO of 2 charities, not 1, 2. He's dedicated his life to helping out the homeless. And his stories made me cry in the podcast. I mean, I don't mind admitting it. His story of how he's managed to go from being a teacher, which I think is a very purposeful job, to something even more purposeful, trying to help the homeless and trying to help children with Down syndrome with his charity Love 21 and his charity Impact Hong Kong. Please go check out that podcast. You'll feel incredibly inspired by Jeff, his insights on how to build a charity, how he perceives the charity world, how he managed to make a charity work for him and for the people he serves. It is mind-blowingly good. And for me, it was a very personal interview because I was homeless for 5 days. So I kind of had a flavor of what that world would look like. If you end up in it for a long term, it's not easy at all, of course. So by listening to Jeff, I think you'll get an insight into that world and maybe you'll want to support some of his charities. So go listen to that podcast because I promise you'll learn something from him. Now, let me bring on my first guest today. Ray, good to see you. How are you?
Great. And greetings from Hong Kong, where it is the evening.
Yeah, I know. It's 9:30 p.m. there now, right?
That's right. That's right.
So thank you for giving up some of your evening to share your knowledge with our audience today. So thanks, mate. Well, first of all, I know you well, but I'd love my audience just to hear a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, let's start with the beginning. I have been in Hong Kong now for 25 years, and I have been working almost 40 years, so in the media somehow. So my first media job was in newspapers, delivering them. And then when I finished university, I studied filmmaking and became a broadcast journalist, working in Canada for 6 years. And then I came to Hong Kong in 1995 to work in local television here in the English broadcasting. And then after that, I began consulting. So the consulting that I was doing was really kind of based around that whole concept that I started when I was in film school of storytelling. So we took people who had been former broadcast journalists, and we started a practice that was exclusively dedicated to helping clients communicate their strengths more effectively. And we called it the crisis planning and training practice. And so I did that at Hill and Knowlton for 10 years, and then I moved it to Edelman for another nearly 9 years. And then in 2018, I decided that I would, after that huge period of time of working for someone else, start my own consultancy, which I called Epic Communications, because I think that summed up my entire attitude in my career towards storytelling. You had to make it big. You had to be bold. You had to really look beyond yourself and put yourself into the shoes of the audiences that you were trying to influence, the clients that you were trying to win, the consumers that you were trying to sell to. So that's where we are now, Epic Communications.
Love it. Well, how has the journey been going from corporate world? I mean, Edelman, for those that don't know, is a very well-known PR company. I've actually worked with them in London as well as Hong Kong. You know, a very respected company. You know, how is it going from like corporate to working for yourself? What's that journey been like for you?
Well, it's interesting because even within those two organizations that I was in, first with Hill and Knowlton and then in Edelman, I was in many ways working very remotely, oftentimes flying here, there, and everywhere to conduct these various trainings, seminars, crisis workshops. So I was often out of the office more than I was in the office. So that transition to starting your own kind of specialized practice wasn't really that hard. What I think was different was the fact that when you're in a big organization, you've got this network of people that you can rely on. You can pick up the phone, ask somebody for something. When you're working on your own, you really have to be much more resourceful. But I think that that also helps me to work with clients in creating efficiency. So the work that I do is helping to develop communication strategies, helping to develop crisis plans, coaching CEOs and executives in how to be better storytellers. And that has, I think, never been more important, especially in this post-pandemic, post-COVID world where companies are really struggling, and now they're trying to figure out, like, what do we do? How do we get back on track? Some of my clients are really struggling in the sense that they're involved in things like aviation, hospitality, fast moving consumer goods, everything that you can kind of think of that's almost been put on hold because it involves the movement of goods and services and people. So this, I think the two things to kind of get back to what you were asking, being on my own allows me to position my expertise a lot more strategically, and also gives clients a lot more accessibility to the services that I offer. They're often intimidated. I don't want to go to a big firm that's going to be expensive. I only want this. I want to have a conversation about what is strategic communication. And the bigger firms are always trying to kind of move and upsell something, because that's the nature of the business. I have a little bit longer horizon when it comes to meeting my own revenue targets, so I can be much more flexible, give a lot more accessibility, and come up with programs that are a little bit more tailored than perhaps I could have when I was part of a bigger organization.
Are there any particular tips right now you think you can offer up for people that are struggling? Is there a communication strategy that could help people? I mean, are there any particular client right now you think, or any particular company, doesn't have to be a client of yours, that you think are doing it right on the communication side? I mean, for example, in England, there's loads of people, acknowledging coronavirus and then still selling their supermarket food as great for Christmas. They're acknowledging it by wearing masks in their ad, but they're not necessarily doing anything to help. Do you think that there are any tips out there for people that might want to reinvent their communications or reinvent their business, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because I think what's really important is to do a couple of things. You've got to start to look at identifying your goals. Like, what is it that you really want in the next year? Is it to sell more? Is it to recruit more? Whatever those goals are, then I think you've got to look at identifying what are the actual action items that you're doing to make that happen, and then aligning the action with proper stories and examples. I think that gone are the days where you can sort of just talk about things in broad general terms. The idea now is to establish trust, and trust is based on action. And I think that it really is about communicating how you can service those clients, service those customers. Are you going to be here for the long term? And one of the big things I think that a lot of companies, especially entrepreneurs, are faced with is asking for money. And what they have to start to think about is not what's my media strategy, but what is my story? What is the strategy? How am I going to communicate to those venture capitalists, those angel investors? How am I going to communicate our story to convince them that we're worth risking their money at this point in time? And one of the things that I talk about in some of my trainings, many of the viewers may have already been watching these great programs like the Dragon's Den or like Shark Tank, where they get these two entrepreneurs or two or three entrepreneurs trying to sell an idea to these three dragons. And a lot of times the people that are doing the selling are talking about themselves, or they're talking about their goals, but they don't really have a strong story, and they're not really putting themselves in the shoes of the three dragons or the three investors or the venture capitalists. And that's one of the things I think that's critical at this time, is to really understand your story and align it with your business plans.
I think you're making an excellent point there. I think in sales, the mistake I think people make is that they're busy selling what they've got and they're not listening to the person they're selling to. So a lot of people struggle right now, especially if they have to find new clients or they have to reinvent their business with selling, because they just say what they've got, but they don't listen to the client, right? And listen to the client, like you're saying there, put yourself in the dragon's shoes. Don't put yourself in the investor's shoes. Put yourself in the side of the person buying. But a lot of people don't do that.
Well, there's two things. One, if you're an entrepreneur, you're focused on a lot of things, mostly operations, maybe business continuity. But you probably haven't thought about a communication strategy, or you've probably offloaded that to somebody saying, okay, we've got a digital marketing person, or we've got somebody doing that. But as a CEO, I think you've got to take a much more active role in your communications. And that was one of the challenges. You talking about what the big difference was. When I started my own consultancy, it was really about branding my expertise. You know, what is Epic Communications? What separates Epic Communications from a large global PR firm? And I think that finding that story and being able to tell that story in one word is something that I'm working with my clients to inspire them to get to think about through a very structured process. And the story of Epic Communication is expertise, structure, and accessibility.
Okay, and when you were, I always love stories about how it all happened, because a lot of my audience are thinking of starting their own business.
Right.
But, you know, did you hand in your notice and you had a big plan before you launched, or did it just, you know, you quit and then did the plan? Or, I mean, you're in communications, I've got a feeling you did a plan first, but what was your process for making your business happen?
Well, I got to a point, again, where, you know, you reach a point in your career where you've kind of like achieved everything you can do, and companies going in one direction, and you've kind of like achieved everything that you can go. So it was time to leave. But then it becomes one of those things like, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to just find another person to work for? So I started to talk to some friends of mine who had done it and got some inspiration from them in terms of mentoring. And two people in particular had been in similar situations where they had left the agency and they had started their own their own kind of consultancy. And it was like, wow, okay. So I have some ideas. I've been running a practice. Now it's time to run it on my own. And so I had the experience. I think it was then a case of going out and appealing to clients who might need this service, working towards getting the collateral together, creating programs. But I had all the knowledge. What I was now doing was repackaging that under the Epic Communications brand and philosophy. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to kind of stress, because if people are watching this, then you must, as anyone, not only in professional services, but anyone as an entrepreneur, you have to buy the book, The Trusted Advisor by David Meister. The Trusted Advisor. Well, the Trusted Advisor concept.
Sorry.
They're excited about it.
They're Hong Kong books. You remember them, I'm sure.
Exactly. The Trusted Advisor concept is really about the idea of positioning yourself as a person that is a resource and not a drain. Somebody who is like the contractor versus the trusted advisor. The contractor is like, you know, what do you want me to do? The trusted advisor is, what do you think the problem is? The contractor is an additional cost, where the trusted advisor is an additional investment. So I think, again, it's this mindset of shifting the way in which you approach business from just like, I want to sell something, I have a great product or service. One of the people that I did work with was an entrepreneur some years back who started a kind of travel and tourism app. And it was really interesting because he's a young guy, had this great idea, but a lot of the times entrepreneurs are like a bowl of spaghetti. Like they're just like all these strands. They've got great ideas. Obviously, they've got some money behind them. They're not really able to kind of concisely communicate what their value proposition is. And so I worked with them to really kind of just get them focused, you know, through the structures and the trainings and the coachings that I provide. And pretty soon they were able to really kind of not only get the CEO discipline, but then there was also a need to get everybody within the organization aligned, which is another important part. If you're the CEO and you have a specific vision and the CFO is saying something to someone else and the CMO is saying something to someone else, you get 3 or 4 different messages. So that I think is really kind of another critical aspect of making sure that in addition to your business plan and your growth strategy, that you have a communication strategy that's aligned with, bringing those different strands together, making sure that you're focused and able to communicate to whoever you need to.
We're live on TikTok, one of the platforms we're live on right now, and people on TikTok are asking me, Bella, please. One of the problems with working from
excited.
home.
I mean,
Well, she's communicating,
exactly
on theme, but yeah, the question is they're asking about, do you advise any particular platforms when talking about communications these days? How do you view social media within the communication landscape? Bearing in mind, there's a lot of businesses on TikTok. It's actually a business asking me this. Alifa official is asking me, what do you think about social media and its role in communication today? Do you think it's overplayed, underplayed, and are there any particular things on social media you think are useful?
Well, you've got to remember that these are just tools or platforms. You've got to look at where is your audience? Where's your audience consuming or digesting that information? In the sort of pre-social media days, you could just send out a newsletter, and that was successful. And some companies still do that, and that totally works if you've got a very small and narrow stakeholder base. But if you're a consumer company, you've got to look at where are those consumers going to be able to digest the information that you're putting out. Is it going to be Facebook? Is it going to be TikTok? Is it going to be WeChat? Is it going to be other platforms that make sense for you? So the idea again is not to say I'm not going to be a part of social media. That's ridiculous. It's not about I've got to be on Twitter. That's ridiculous. You've got to think, where is my target stakeholder group going to get that information, or do I have to grow it? One of the things that I do work on with a lot of companies when they, especially in crisis, this is kind of a good example of it, because a lot of times I'll say things like, what's your, how do you communicate with your, your customers? And they'll say, we don't have a social media presence. The problem with that is that when there's a problem, you don't have an audience already built in that you're communicating with. So when there's a problem, they go everywhere, right? You've got no control over the narrative. So, if you want to grow a specific consumer or stakeholder base, find the platform that makes sense and start, building that up by creating meaningful content, making sure that you're populating it, making sure that you're amplifying it. And then if you're going to go in that route, look at ways in which you can amplify that content. So maybe you find a piece of content, whether it's video or a message or a meme, whatever it's going to be, put it to your group. And then you look at ways in which you can get the 3 types of media, which would be, of course, paid, earned, and owned. So you've got your own site on some social media platform. Then you pay to amplify it, and then you earn it by getting somebody to write about you or be like in this podcast. This is kind of, for me, earned media to get my message out. So I think, again, back to the question, I'm my own best example of how to use the things that I teach in my own business. I don't advertise. I don't have a website. Everything that I do is by word of mouth, by reputation, and by working with people like yourself who are passionate about something, and then bring me on to help to communicate your ideals and share some of my experiences. That, I think, is where I think the question needs to be focused that was just asked.
I think the point you just made there about paid, earned, and owned media is so, it's got lost. That's very old wisdom that is still very current. But I feel it's kind of got lost because most people are thinking, post up on social media and done, but you need to mix it up, right? You need to work for free to get, reach the right people. And as you say, on the earn side, and then you do have to pay, make that investment. And of course, then your own medias, like I've got my own podcast platforms, these things. it's fascinating. There's a few comments coming on some of the channels now. You don't have a website, which I think is fascinating. You know, like I think again, that's if you're starting a business, that's often where the first thing people build is I've got a business, I've built the URL and I've opened a website up. You know, it's almost the first thing that people do, and I think it's great. You've got such a successful business in communications where you're basically you're doing it through relationships. You're doing it through the good work that you do. And not necessarily what everyone thinks is do a website and it will sell me for me, right?
It's a bit, I think, in some ways, if that's what you think you need to sell the offer, great. But what I prefer to do is use LinkedIn because I think it's a far more relevant tool for my business, for my consultancy. And then again, when it comes to the offer, because a lot of what I do is so tailored. I mean, I've got platforms and structures, but if somebody comes to me and says, I want to have a training of this, that, or the other thing, or I want to have, can I bring you in as an advisor on the specific project? Then I sit down with them and I kind of go through, through active listening. What is the problem? Who are you trying to communicate with? Why do you think this is a situation that you find yourself in? And then I expand it from there. And again, I'm not at the point yet where I've got a dozen employees and I'm trying to kind of meet financial targets. This is only, again, within 2 years that I've been doing it. And the COVID situation has kind of, in some ways, hit a pause button on a lot of us, which has caused me to kind of then work a lot more one-on-one, thinking about using remote communications. All of those things that, like I have to go out and meet the clients. I have to go and reach out to clients personally because they may not know about me, or I get a lot of referrals as well. I mean, that's again how a lot of professional services work. So it's all about networking. It's all about referrals. It's all about past experiences. A lot of people that I might have worked with who were a CEO or an entrepreneur with one company may have then gone on to another company. And then they're like, I worked with this guy a few years back. I wonder what he's doing. And then they kind of contact me, usually through LinkedIn. It's amazing that if you get the right platform and channel, then you're able to, grow your network of clients and prospects. So if you think that a website is an important thing, that's great. It's not what I need for my business. But again, the question is not about any specific platform. It's about how do you reach the consumers or the stakeholders that you want in order to get the contracts that you need.
Do you feel like there are any instant things you see often people make or do wrong when they start a business? Any obvious tips you could give people that if anyone out there, I say a lot of my listeners are interested in starting a business. Are there any things that jump to mind just to make sure you don't make those mistakes?
Well, I can talk about it from a communications perspective because I think that that's more relevant to the sort of strategic advice that I give. I think the first thing that I see a lot of entrepreneurs do is they completely ignore any concept that there's a need to invest in communications. So you'll have your legal advisor, you'll have your compliance office. Maybe you might have some sort of, agency doing creative or marketing for you. But the idea to bring in a communications advisor is just like foreign because it's like, what's this person doing? They're just talking to me, but it's not quite like that. So you've got to look at the idea in terms of how would a communications counselor fit into my overall budgeting and ability to, plan my next campaign. I'll give you an example. I'll just give you an example because I think this is a pretty interesting example. Some years back, we were working with the producer, like the traditional Chinese medicine market in Asia is just hugely crowded. You've got all sorts of different types of treatments like cordyceps and bird's nest, all these types of ginseng. And there was one organization that came to us and was looking to raise the price of their specific Chinese medicine product. And it was kind of the same as a lot of other products. So they were looking again in terms of getting strategic communications advice. How do we position this particular product versus our competitors? And one of the things that I did, again, through the analysis that I do, was to identify that what they were trying to do was position this as a premium product and that the country of origin was really the differentiator. And once we understood that, we developed an entire, communication strategy. But they had a very interesting sort of consumer base, because they weren't selling direct to consumers. They were selling to a lot of medicine shops and Chinese medicine organizations. So they really had to kind of communicate with those people who would then be the influencers, who would then distribute their product to the patients or whoever. You see what I mean? Like, so again, you get back to the idea of like, what sort of platform makes sense for these guys? Obviously, they're going to have to try to figure out how to raise the price of this particular medicine to make it a premium product. But we really kind of worked around the concept of the country that it came from was clean, it was fresh, it was healthy. And those kind of concepts were what separated this particular product from everything else that may look and smell and taste like the others. And you see this now again with things like this fake meat, for example. Like, how do you sell that? What's really at stake with some of these things? And some of that experience, I think, so they don't really understand the difference between their objectives and telling a really great story. The other mistake that they make is that they focus every conversation on selling instead of storytelling. And I think the third kind of big mistake is that a lot of CEOs, a lot of companies will just like outsource their communications to someone else rather than a CEO, because a CEO is kind of like, spend a lot of time in business school. They know everything there is to know about spreadsheets and things like that, but they don't know anything about how to position, how to communicate, how to basically plan and structure a message or a story. And that's where, again, the expertise that I've had in both broadcasting and then in working with all these different clients, either in crisis or in training or in counseling them in campaigns, that I think I'm able to make accessible to clients in my own capacity. It's Epic Communications.
I think the storytelling piece is another very important point to highlight that you're mentioning there. I think so many people, I spoke to a founder recently who has a business that's doing quite well, but they've actually kept their personal story for why they do it quiet. And partly because their personal story is about how they went to prison and how that affected them. But they're scared to tell that story because they don't want the business to be tarnished by their story. But that's the motivation for them doing the business. And I was saying that actually, my view is you put the story in there. Yes, you may get some people that will judge you, but you don't want to work with those people anyway. But it's authentic and it's who you are. And that's what's motivating you today. So the people that accept who you are and that story will be very loyal, as opposed to those that might 6 months into working with you find out that story anyway.
Well, there's a couple of things to think about in that situation. I think that one is trust.
Yes.
And I think that finding a way to position that experience as something that's forward-looking rather than I'm a bad person and I should be forever banished and shamed. It's more like, what has that experience taught me in terms of relationships, or I don't know what the product or service that they're selling is. But again, sometimes it's relevant and sometimes it's not. You see this a lot of times where people have had very difficult experiences, or like with veterans, for example, they don't want to talk about the experience in, a conflict or war. It's something that's like they've kind of moved on about. And I think, you've got to look at it in terms of, is it relevant? And is this something that, if it's part of me as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, how can I inject that without making it sound like I'm exploiting it or, virtue signaling or doing something inauthentic? Because your consumers will pick it up, your stakeholders will pick it up right away that, oh, this guy's just, using the whole prison thing to kind of make us feel sorry for him. Yeah. I think that there has to be this idea of, is it relevant to bring it up in a conversation, and how would you do that? And this is where you need outside support, because just to kind of think, oh, well, how do I do it? They couldn't. They would need somebody like in a capacity like mine to really kind of work through in terms of, when is this appropriate? How is this appropriate? What would be a way of introducing it? When would we do this? Or do we have to do it at all? Like, again, maybe it's not relevant. But then if it comes up, it's like, well, this person, was in prison. What were they in prison for? I mean, that's another thing that's kind of important to understand. So again, just to sort of say, oh, well, we can use it. No, they need to have communications counsel in the same way that you would have legal counsel or compliance counsel or, other types of counsel, accounting, company secretary. You wouldn't do this on your own.
I actually agree. I think communication is a bit of an underrated discipline. It's almost like, you can figure it out by communicating. But it is an art form. I completely agree. As you know, I had an agency for 15 years, so I couldn't agree more that it's a very valuable thing. But for a lot of people, the tip you're giving there about storytelling, I think, is so true. But of course, even then, you do need to use it carefully. Even myself, I've got a story that for the longest time I was embarrassed to tell. I was kicked out of home and was homeless for 5 days. I didn't want to tell that story so people felt sorry for me. And I didn't want to tell that story to make people think that I wasn't a success today, because I was a homeless person once, like somehow that stigma sticks with you. And so it's very hard to tell the story, but I think equally it is very powerful if you can tell it with authenticity, and it does link to the reason you're doing what you're doing today. I'm doing what I'm doing today because I don't want people to be homeless. I'm doing what I am doing today because I don't want people to not have a job like I didn't at 15 years old, when I was on the street. So but you've got to, as you say quite rightly, you've also got to make sure that it's authentic and it's not just a story to leverage for the business, and it's something that actually is relevant to the business and has some merit to make the business story more coherent. So yeah.
Well, and the other aspect of that is the trust building aspect. Is this going to help me to be more believable in these situations? I think is credible. And then I think in your case, again, the idea that like being down and out or down on your luck is, I think, a very powerful motivator for everything that you do. So it's authentic. But I mean, if you're just kind of going out there and talking about it without any context, then it comes off as being very, smarmy and virtue signaling. And I think that there's just way too much of that, and your stakeholders will smell that in a second and go, no, that doesn't make sense. But the way that you've positioned it is, I think, the way that, again, it's, you can't just do it off the top of your head. I mean, obviously you're a communications professional, but the way that we're sharing our expertise here means that there is a structure, there is a strategy, there is a time and place. And I think bringing in an outside professional to help you with that is important. The other thing that brings up, you talk about the mistakes that people make. The other mistake is that, like, it looks easy. It just looks so easy. Like, to hear the two of us talk and people, whoa, these two guys, well, they really kind of, they have this great rapport and they're like sharing their expertise. But this is, for me, 35 years of working and sharing that, going from film school to working 12 years in media every single day, cranking out 2 or 3 stories, being able to think on your feet, and then transferring those skills from being the one that's like the outsider speaking to being the insider counseling. Again, that was a different mindset. And then doing that, taking all those skills and then doing it entirely on my own is like, this is my third career.
I think the trusted advisor piece you made earlier, I think I always love it when the people I'm working with don't become a service provider, but a trusted advisor. But you have to work it. It's just like any relationship. If you treat your supplier like a supplier, they will be a supplier. If you treat your supplier with respect and mutual support, I always ask my suppliers how I can help them too. Then you build up that trusted advisor. And then if you get that right, you're getting a lot of love online, by the way. A lot of people like, if you don't need a website, then you're doing something right. Like, that's an interesting take on it, right? It's and I've got people, some very prominent people in the London startup ecosystem, like Peter, just saying thanks for sharing your insights. And I had a question. I've got Candice waiting in the waiting room, our next guest coming on, but I've got one question before we jump to Candice.
Shoot.
Someone is asking about getting a mentor. What do you think about getting a mentor in your business? What do you think about that concept?
I think that that's an excellent thing. I had a mentor. I had 2 mentors, actually. No, I could say 3 mentors. I'm thinking of the people, but again, they were people that had started their own business, and were very willing to share their experiences, as long as I was able to not tax their time and not be overly needy and not be like, demanding of something from them. I had to kind of know when and how to leverage their expertise. And so, we would meet, or I would call. I still do. What do I do about this? What do you think of this? But I'm very mindful of not, crossing the line in these relationships, but knowing what it is, because there's a difference, right? A mentor is somebody who is going to help you. If you're just going to rely on them, then I think you need to hire somebody, right? Like if you're going to be calling somebody every 15 minutes for advice, that's a trusted advisor paid relationship. I think a mentor would be someone where you're doing all the heavy lifting, but once in a while, you just need somebody to kind of go, is this making sense? Did you face this when you did? It has to be someone who's on a peer level, right? Otherwise, you're trying to get something for free. Like it's like going to a lawyer and saying, I need a lawyer to be my mentor, when you're actually trying to get free legal advice.
Yes, good point.
That's not right. But the idea of a mentor is to find someone who's a peer, who may be somebody who's in that same industry or doing something similar to you, and maybe is just like a little bit more advanced than you are, so that you can bring your sort of skill sets like in the frame here. Like they're up here, but not up here. Because if they're up here, then you're in a situation where you need to be paying for that advice. A mentor would be like you and I, for example, could be like mentors or mentees, right? I come to you and I go, Simon, look, I've got this idea. What do you think? And you go, you know what? That sounds great. But if I sit down with you for like 2 hours, I should be paying you, right? That's what professional services is.
I agree.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think there's also a misunderstanding with the word mentor. A mentor and a coach, for example. A coach is very different to a mentor. But I think a lot of people ask me to be their mentors, and it's always a compliment. But having said that, to your point, that you've only got so many hours in a day, and a mentor relationship is actually a pretty intense one if you do it right. You're there to help that person, and so yeah. But I think I've been lucky enough to have a lot of mentors. I had the billionaire Alan Zeman. He was my mentor when I was living in Hong Kong, and he helped me set up Meta there, which I know you were a big fan of. Yeah. It took me years to build a relationship with him. And then when he did give me advice, his son also gave me advice and supported me, Jonathan. But, I also always said, what can I do for you guys in return? Clearly they didn't need money, but, there was ways I could give my expertise back to them to help them. And I think that sometimes, mentorship is actually a two-way street. That's another thing I think people don't realize. It's like, it's good to give, and certainly people will give you an hour or two as a one-off bit of advice. But I think if you want an ongoing mentorship role, then like you say, there's probably either a coach role there that's probably a more financial, or there's some quid pro quo, right? So, but look, Ray, I could talk to you forever, but I say you're getting a lot of love online, but I feel like Candice is very politely waiting in the wings and looking for our help today. So let's bring her on. Candice, good to see you. We've got 30 people on TikTok and 17 people on YouTube, and we're live on every channel. So lots of people that want to hear your story this morning. So or this afternoon. Tell us what's going on. What are you about?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me, and I hope I do the storytelling justice after that. After that intro.
Before you start, can you tell your story, your corporate story, in one word?
In one word?
One word. Sum it up.
Hope.
Oh, okay.
Good.
Okay.
Well done, Candice. I was feeling the pressure for you there as well.
All right.
I'm purpose, I think. But what's your?
Okay. You had me at hope. Okay, continue.
That's good. So I guess starting with myself, I'm Canadian. I studied engineering, moved here in 2008 to do my MBA. I've worked in innovation consulting for a few years. I've worked in impact investing for the past 7 years. And where the story for Liminal really starts is about 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer at age 32. So I went through a year of treatment, had a local recurrence where the tumor came back in the same spot about a year later. But I've been clear for 3 years now, which is great. And the inspiration for Liminal basically came from my experiences as a patient. So my main issue was really finding the right, credible, evidence-backed, researched information around how I could help myself and what lifestyle factors I needed to change in my own life to prevent this cancer from returning again. When I asked my oncology team, they basically told me, don't worry, try and eat healthy, try and get some exercise if you can, but there's really nothing you can do, which on the one hand was a big relief, that it wasn't my fault and, there wasn't really anything I could do. But on the other hand, the thing I wanted most was to take a bit of control over the situation and feel like I could contribute to my own healing. So after doing my own research, actually, I found out that something as simple as getting the kind of government guideline recommendation of exercise every week could reduce my risk of recurrence by over 30%, which is quite significant. Alongside all the other evidence that's coming out about mind-body connection, reducing your stress, eating properly, all these things, all these factors that kind of combine to make your whole health. So we spoke to a whole bunch of other patients. Lots of people resonated with this. Lots of people mentioned the lack of emotional support as well for people at this time. And particularly once you've come to the end of your treatment. So people feel almost pushed off a cliff. There's not much support post-disease. There's, everybody does a great job of treating the disease itself, but afterwards, I was just told, okay, see you in 6 months at your next checkup. So what we do at Liminal is we provide health coaching for people affected by long-term health conditions and chronic conditions. The reason we decided to go for health coaching is because we really believe in the power of coaching, which you guys were just talking about, to help you identify where you are today, where you want to be in the future, and identify the tiny steps that you should be taking or you want to take for yourself to get you along that path. And I think the key thing with this whole kind of holistic living and whole body approach is that there's so much to do and it can be really overwhelming. So a coach can really help you prioritize which bits are most important for you to nail first and to kind of, make a start on your journey that way. So the last thing I'll say is we work with companies. That's our route to market really, is we work with companies to coach their staff to improve their productivity and reduce churn, increase engagement, increase loyalty. The stat is that a third of the workforce, statistically in the UK, is facing a long-term health condition. Most HR leaders, the ones I've spoken to anyways, know of about 5%. So this is a very hidden problem, which is a challenge for us in terms of communicating what we do and proving our worth as well. So maybe I'll stop there for an intro.
Oh, Candice, thank you for sharing your story and wonderful what you're doing. It's kind of crazy to me that a third of people have a condition of some sort. That's just, as you say, a lot of people are probably embarrassed to talk about it or don't want it to affect the relationships in their work environment, right? So it's quite a difficult thing to talk about. My wife, my mother-in-law, she had cancer and sadly died. But it was shocking to both of us, my wife and I, when we go to the doctors with her, and the doctor would literally be so clinical about it. You've got 6 months to live, and that's just the stats I'm telling you and being up front with you. And then you go away, and you realise that as you quite rightly point out, that holistic medicines and eating properly, in a detailed way, understanding what you can and cannot eat based on your body type and the type of cancer you've got, can seriously reduce the cancer, or certainly help you extend the amount of time that you've got. And so my wife actually ended up being a kinesiologist. She learned kinesiology on the back of the fact that she was a designer, a graphic designer. She retrained completely because she saw the gap in the market, I guess, for like looking after people that had been told by doctors they had no hope. And so I really resonate with what you're doing, and thank you for it. Ray, what do you think of the communication of what Candice has explained her business as a communication expert? What do you think?
A couple of things come to mind in just hearing you speak. One is I think we talked about this just a moment ago. I don't know if you were able to listen, but the idea of when do you put yourself into the story? And I think you've got a really incredible story that makes sense for you to share. We talked about somebody who might be reluctant to talk about their personal story for one reason or another. But I think the whole basis of your business is based around this idea that you were looking for something. And once you discovered the gap in the marketplace, once you got your back to healing, you were able to take that experience and then figure out a business around it. So that's the first thing. I think that's like an amazing thing to think about. The other thing to think about is, again, a little bit more of a strategic positioning. The idea of hope, I think, is the basis or the objective of, this is another thing that you talk about, like, how do CEOs or entrepreneurs confuse communication? They confuse the objectives with the story. The hope idea is really the objective. Creating hope is what your business does. But the actual story is one of reducing risk. It's one of, lifestyle, improving productivity, the kinds of things that if I was a CEO and I was looking at which kind of consultancy that I bring in, that's what would appeal to me. The idea of hope is something that would be an outcome of, productive and healthy employees, that I would have, a sustainable business. So again, this is a very kind of interesting kind of way of looking at which audience. Now, if you're going to be talking to an audience of entrepreneurs, the hope story is a great story. If you're going to be trying to look at positioning the business to CEOs that you're trying to perhaps get an entry into, I think the idea of, improved productivity, identifying and de-risking the health risks, especially in a time of COVID, is, I think, the direction that I would probably kind of think of, putting you in.
And I think to add to what Ray's saying there, I mean, hope is a wonderful word. I absolutely love it. But it sounds like your business model has a lot of preemptive care elements in it, which, that's what corporations are perhaps, very interested in. They don't want people to get sick. So it's like hoping you don't need hope, like, or the hope is that no one gets sick in our organization. So it's using that word in different sentences, I think, is an interesting communication strategy, because hope, I know when my mother-in-law was sick, we had hope that she would get better. She had hope, right? But looking into it, we also realized that we had to look after ourselves, right, to be able to care for her. So it is a very interesting dynamic. But today, a part of the reason we're doing this podcast is, to get amazing people like Ray with all his experience on here for free, helping people. But to help you, help you. Is there anything in particular right now that we can help you with?
Well, I think talking more about this, positioning and stuff is super helpful for us. I think we have three priorities right now. One is probably the same as every startup business in the world: sales, product, and fundraising. So. Right.
So get more clients.
Yeah, exactly.
Win more business.
Yeah. So I think at the moment, we're working with 2 corporate clients, which is great. They came on board and have been our pioneering clients, which has been great. We've been coaching some of their employees. I think we are, myself and my co-founder, Christine, who's been chatting away in the chat there as well, supporting. We've been, pushing on our kind of sales and learning sales as we go along. So any sort of help with our kind of approaches there, or ways to find people. We're also, in terms of the fundraising side of things, we are hoping to raise £250,000 in an angel round by the end of Q1 next year. So that's another area of support that would be great. And product, I guess this is kind of, the heart of what we're doing is, at the moment, what I'm finding challenging is we have this big vision for what we want to do, and we have the little tiny MVP of what we're doing now. And so how do you bridge that ability gap, I guess, and how do you sell? I guess it ties into the sales conversation, but where we only have like a fraction of the product that we would like to have, how do we sell that now to get traction, to get us the fundraising, to let us grow and build that product out?
I have a lot of thoughts on this. Ray, do you want to go first, though?
Yeah, I think that a couple of things come to mind here. I think that one of the things that you've got to look at is a few things, just identifying really what's at stake for your business. I think you probably know, but there's a lot of ideas, and I think this crystallizing it is really kind of critical. You've got an operational business plan. You've obviously got an offer. Now you're looking at, okay, so I know what I need to do. I need to get more money. I need to get more clients. So I think that making sure that you understand your messaging and making sure that it's critical, that it's crystal clear is really important. Because remember that, an angel investor is going to look at this and they're going to go, "That's a beautiful story, and it's a very touching story, but I don't get it." Right? So you've got to look at, how do I communicate de-risking their investment?
Yeah.
What is it that I'm able to provide, or in return for that 250 pounds, 1,000 pounds, or whatever it is that you're looking for? So you've got to look beyond the idea, like being in the business, no matter like the great personal story that you have, it only goes so far if you can't communicate de-risking their investment. And that, I think, is at the core of what you're doing. And once you can figure that out, then you'll be able to take all those different strands and put it into a package that someone will look at and go, "Okay, this is a great story." And the hope story and the personal story, I think, is a really great proof point in all of that, because it kind of fundamentally shows that you're in this because you really care, and it really comes from something deep inside yourself, which, is great. But if you don't have a business plan, it's just a great story.
Yeah, I agree with Ray. I guess there's some practical elements to the questions you're asking, and I guess one thing, I personally built 18 businesses. I've done it so many. Each one has been a different experience in the way that it's got built. I feel for you on the resource side. It's always like that when you're building a business. I never have felt, even when I've had hundreds of people working for me, that I have enough resources. Just part of it. And I think that actually it's very wise to be that way too. I mean, my last company, Fluid, got bought by PwC. They were still cautious. Their cash flow is crazy. They've got billions of pounds cash flow that they could spend on the business, but they don't, because I think it is wise and prudent to build it carefully based on, you win a client, you service that client. And I think, I know there are businesses today that we see, like Facebook, or for example, that suddenly are massive, but even they started off small and had limited resources. And so that scarcity can cause innovation, I think, because you have to really keep listening to the customer and listening to the demographic and what they need. Whereas if you have lots of money, I've seen lots of people go away and build lots of infrastructure to then go back to the market, and the infrastructure isn't required by the market. That wasn't what they wanted. That's what you thought that they wanted. So, but I've also found, your stage that you're at now is actually a very exciting stage, because you've got something, it works. You've kind of got an MVP. You proved that 2 clients want it. You proved the market needs it. It's actually very exciting. So maybe take a moment to appreciate that. I know for entrepreneurs, we're too busy thinking about the next bit, but breathe and go, "Wow, awesome. We've actually got something people need." And you always knew it, but you proved it. So congratulations. I think when it comes to the next step, your 3 strategies, like raise money, more sales, and product, in a way is all the same thing, right? Because I feel like I've raised money, for example, from a corporate relationship. So I've said to a client, "I will expand my business to service your needs. You fund it." And you can raise the money through your client relationships. Equally, of course, just get a sale for 250,000 to fund the next stage. It might not seem as easy as getting an investor in some respects. You get an investor, you've got the money, then you can do the expansion and then win the client. But actually, in some respects, it's better, because if you get an investor, and I can say this as an investor, so I can insult my own clan for a second. Sometimes investors can be like a boss. Like, okay, I thought I was putting my money in and we were doing this. I thought I was putting my money in and I was going to get my profit out at the end of the year. Whereas your dream is to make this work for everyone forever. Their dream is to take their 250 and turn it into 1 million, right? Yeah. So, or even more, right? So I think sometimes the raising money thing is a bit of a, be careful with it. That being said, I think you are a perfect candidate for crowdfunding. I don't know if you've looked at it.
Yeah, I think my hesitation is just that I think the process, we need to have kind of landed 30 to 40% of the amount before we start. So I think it's definitely something that we would consider, but potentially after we've, found that first 100K from somewhere and then put it on a crowdfunding site.
Yeah, it's chicken egg, but you're talking about equity crowdfunding. But I think it could also be a Kickstarter version, which is less about equity. I mean, of course, you've got GoFundMe. I also think you've got potential to go on platforms like that.
Yeah.
Because you've got a story that isn't just about making money, right? Equity crowdfunding is about businesses with a strong financials, which I feel sure that you have. But I think you have what a lot of businesses don't have. You have hope. You have something that they don't have. And I think that could mean that a lot of people might support you. I want to support you. I don't need any return. I'm sitting here thinking, I'm not going to give you the 250, but I definitely give you something. And I don't care about the financial return. And despite people's skepticism about, people with money, there are a lot of good people with money out there. And a lot of good people with money out there that have been through a similar experience that you're talking about and don't necessarily have the youth that you have and the time to go and build what you're building, but would love to support it. My wife's clients, for example, a couple of them I know, very wealthy people, very nice people, and they're going through chronic illness and they wish they'd had hope earlier on. So I'm sure people like that will give you money, and that sort of money to me aligns with the business mission. Whereas, if you go on a crowdfunding site, and I just interviewed Jeff Lynn, who's the founder of one of the big Seeders, one of the big sites that's about to merge with Crowdcube. They're the largest investor in Europe, right? I mean, I just interviewed the founder, and he's very purposeful. But you've got to understand those platforms are capitalistic platforms. So there is an element of does that gel with your business mission? And so another practical bit of advice, maybe you already know this, but there's a site called AngelList. Do you know it?
Yes. I haven't quite figured out how to use it properly. Okay.
First step with learning how to do a platform. Tip number 1, go on it and register.
I am registered.
Did you put your company up?
Yeah, I think so.
And you put your logo in and you filled in all the details of the company and what you're doing, and you've highlighted you're raising 250.
Maybe that's the last step that I haven't done.
Just list it, because there's reactive sales and there's proactive sales, right? But then hopefully by having it on there, someone might go on AngelList today and type in health startup, and there you are, right? So increase your chances of luck by just making sure you do things like that. But I would be very cautious about the investment route, and I would be very bullish personally on getting clients.
Yes.
Because I think if you get clients on board, frankly, if they're a pain in the butt, you can fire them. Whereas once you've got an investor and their equity in your company, that gets a lot more complicated. Plus, frankly, the more successful you are as a platform, the easier it gets to raise money. You've got 2 clients in MVP, £250,000 sounds like an okay number, not the top end, not the low end, it's okay. But I still want to see some element of success before I give you a house, or 2. And so there's, for some people, but if you had another 5 clients, it's getting a lot easier. I think you can start to ask for $1 million, maybe even for the same amount of equity, right? So there's an element of I would probably, if you've got limited resources, focus in on building incredible case studies on the 2 clients you've got, put all your energy into getting another 2 clients. And then that, I think, could lead to an investment either from the corporates themselves, which, by the way, have investment arms. A lot of people don't realize. If you're talking to you're probably talking to HR, my guess is, but they've got a marketing department that might want to market that. There's budget there. They've got an investment division that might be interested in investing in a health platform that reduces their productivity issues, especially right now, as Ray pointed out, through mental health and so on. These things will definitely affect productivity, which appeal to that with corporate. There's nothing wrong with accepting that's a corporate agenda, corporate goal. Ray said earlier goals, which I think is really, really important word. And I think those goals of corporates, understanding them and you accommodating them, can lead, I think, to your eventual raising of the money. But I know it's hard because ideally you want a couple of new clients, some products, and you want the fundraising all to come in next week, and then bang, you can hire the great people you need, right?
Exactly.
Well, let me just also share and kind of add to that, because I think that, again, you're getting very good, sound business strategic advice. From the communications perspective, what you want to do is start to look at building the profile of the business, right? Mm-hmm. So again, it's placing yourself with other influencers. Can you partner with any kind of government department? Can you speak, for example, to insurance companies about things like pre-loss? Again, working with a company like yours can help reduce healthcare costs for companies. For example, one of the things that I did with my business was looked at all the different professional organizations that I could link up with and I could speak at, because that would put me in touch with decision makers. Now, it doesn't always work, right? I mean, it's like, but the thing is that by strategically doing it, by reaching out to these organizations, by speaking on things like this podcast, for example, by appearing as an expert commentator in media, by doing my own podcast on things that are really important to me, I'm able to put myself out there and then make the connections. How you make those connections is a factor of the level of ability to communicate that story through different platforms. Somebody asked me this question earlier, which social media platform would you advocate? And I said that, you have to do what makes sense for you to reach those clients. And then again, given the fact that you've got limited financial resources, you don't want to be blowing things on an ad budget or, a digital marketing campaign when you're not at that point yet, right? That's where the money that you're looking for might help. Right now, as Simon says, you've got to start to look at maybe just getting a couple of home runs. And then from there, building on that. But that's where, again, this is a perfect example of what we were talking about in the first segment. Companies like yourself need services like mine. They just don't know it. There's the idea I need a business advisor, but the idea that communication can help actually save you money by directing you to those groups that might be able to put you in touch with, potential clients. So again, identifying what makes you unique, driving coordinated messaging, connecting different aspects of your offer, linking that with that brand, that hope story, that brand, and then aligning messages through different people in your company, if it's just yourself or a few people, and then making sure that there's a consistent message that you're delivering, and then showcasing that through some of the wins and the proof points. Those, I think, would be the ways in which a communication strategy could align with what Simon's just talked about in terms of business strategy.
I would just add, I've just posted up something I think is quite funny. I think you guys should merge and you'd have Epic Hope.
Right. So there you go. I think that now people are starting to kind of see, oh, okay, now I see the role of communication.
Yeah, Epic Hope.
When you're good at it, you make it look easy, right?
Yeah,
that's the point of this. When you're able to do it with the kind of fluidity that we have been through the experiences that we've had, people go, I could do that. Then they try it and it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. The other thing to kind of think about at this point is you're in a situation where people are focused on healthcare and on wellness and all those things that you have kind of been able to do by overcoming your own battle with cancer fall into the idea right now of how is it that COVID and lockdowns like the one that I'm in right now are impacting people's mental health and aggravating potential conditions like cancers and other stress-related illnesses, stomach diseases, things like that, suicides, things like that. So that, I think, you've got a really good story, I think, aligning it. Another part of a communication strategy is to align it to something topical. So a post-pandemic recovery, you go and you talk to your CEO or your HR director. Let me ask you a question. Who is your target within any organization? Like, who is the decision maker for you to get that client? Who do you need to talk to?
It is like HRDs or CEOs is basically our target.
It's interesting. So the HR usually has the money and the CEO might be kind of inspired by this, but then want to look at. So you've got two sort of messages here. One that's kind of aligned with the idea of the productivity and the efficiency and the risk mitigation. And then you've got this sort of training aspect for HR that's going to look at, recruitment, best employer and best practices, all kind of encapsulated in the post-pandemic recovery story, something like that. I'm just doing this off the top of my head, but if you, really sat down and kind of planned it out, then I think you'd be able to kind of map it in a direction where you could take all that great energy and ideas and really focus it on the decision makers. I had the same problem. Like when I talked to insurance companies, I had this great offer, and it was all sort of like set up. And I would go and I would talk to, like I had a crisis training, which I think is a fantastic program. But when I would go and I talk to people, I would be talking to these risk management people who are like, they totally get what I'm doing, but they don't control the budgets. They don't make decisions. So then I changed I worked with my partners, like, let's talk to CEOs. So then we started to do it to CEOs. And then you got a little bit more success because they were like, oh, okay, I get what you're doing. And I do have money. But a lot of them didn't, like the communications person. So then you had to get the communicate. So a lot of this is trial and error. So I think, again, determining who you need to speak to and who pays for it in the organization, and, you know, setting up meetings. And it's just a lot of, you know, a lot of times, same thing that I'm doing, you know, picking up the phone, or in this case, you know, writing people, introducing myself, networking. After this, you know, creating some content for yourself, whether it's through media or whether it's through what I talked about earlier, bought, you know, paid for media, earned, where someone interviews you, or owned, where you create your own little video or content about your business and share it. That I think would be a worthwhile investment. And a lot of these tools for a business like yours, I mean, because you're doing everything on your own, you could probably be able to kind of put something together that is authentic, but still looks good and is able to reach those decision makers.
I'll just add actually to what Ray's saying too, Candice, because I mean, I'm getting back to your question about, you know, what you need right now. There's a couple of things. First of all, what Ray's talking about there about identifying who you're targeting relates also to investors. I think one of the ways I think sales is best done is if you can do 2 sales in 1 meeting. So for example, if you, I've got someone in my mind as a client profile. So there's a guy called Simon Long, who I had on my podcast show. He runs a business called We Labs. They're now the largest online bank in the world. They've got 43 million customers. He has grown incredibly in the last few years, and he's made lots of money. I'm sure he won't mind me saying. And he has a really successful business, and he privately owns it. He's got investors, and so I think someone like him could be quite an interesting investor, because he could not only invest in you, he could also bring your service to his company and add value to his business, right? And look after his people, which he cares a lot about, I would add. But he also cares a lot about his customers. So, you know, I last count I looked, I might be getting this wrong, so if Simon listens to this later, forgive me, but, you know, 5,000 employees, and 43 million customers. You know, so an investor like that could bring a lot to the table, right? Yeah. And so I think if you can sell, you know, to one person who brings you customers internally, like you've got the corporate relationship, and then brings you external customers, and then there's also an investor, that's interesting. And then the other type of a double selling profile you could think about is one of my last businesses. I think what made the business work was I brought on some partners in the business, and when they came on board, they invested in the business. So I showed them what I'd put into the company. I said, look, this is what I put in. This is, you know, this is my idea, but, you know, this is what I did. And then when you come on board, you co-invest with me. We'll be co-founders in the business together. So in other words, I don't know what you're thinking of spending that 250 on, and maybe we don't have enough time to go through that now. But, you know, sometimes people allocate some of that money to hiring people, right? So if you can actually bring someone on, and I'm suddenly thinking, Ray, if you can bring a partner on and do some sort of long-term deal where you can make them a trusted advisor or a partner or co-founder, you know, then you can reduce your costs, because maybe they'll come on for either a lower salary or no salary as part of the investment, and actually put capital into the business. So that's what happened in my case, and it proved to be a very successful formula. There's a lot of good people right now that don't have work. So this could be a good time for a strategy like that, because now I was just I don't know what talent you need to hire, but I was just looking at the Airbnb layoff talent. They've got a website of all the people they laid off. My mind was blown. I was looking through that list thinking of all the companies I could create around those talented people, you know? So it's just another strategy to think about, you know? So you've got the kind of client investor type, and then you've got the potential help you resources wise, join your team either as a trusted advisor or as a co-founder operating partner.
Yeah, very good ideas. I love the kind of doubling up the 2 sales in 1. That's a great idea. And I'd love an intro, Simon, if that's possible.
Sure. Well, I won't promise because I don't want. Let's look through the deck and we'll talk about it. Because again, with these people, we get one shot as well. So I don't want to bother them without knowing. But sure, I mean, he's very approachable. Go listen to his podcast. You'll see what I mean. He's such a down-to-earth, nice person. I'm sure he'd be very excited about what you're doing. Just need to make sure there's a good, strong reason to bring him in and how it would work. So let's talk about that for sure. Any other questions of myself or Ray or the audience listening before we end today's podcast?
Just thank you guys so much for your time. I've really appreciated being on here, and thanks so much for having me. I actually did my MBA with Jeff Lynn 10 years ago. So it's a bit
with him. Oh, then you know him.
Yeah.
Oh, then tap him up. He's got companies to know. Have you tapped him up?
I have sent him a few messages. Yeah, he's a great guy.
I just listened to your podcast on the Good Luck Club. It was so good. P.S. Give me 250. And he's a good example. He Revolut, one of the companies they help fund. He's got the relationship with those guys, right? Revolut should be your client, right?
Yep.
So work that network a bit more. I mean, that's I threw him out like, look who I know, and look, you did an MBA with him. So he's a great guy as well. Very, very nice person. So
yeah, definitely.
He will love your story, I think, and I'm sure have many ways to help you raise the money.
Yeah, definitely.
And get out there and start telling your story any way that you can. Leverage any kind of platform that makes sense.
Yeah.
The thing about like social media platforms is they do provide instant communication and instant feedback. So if you can build a little following around that. The other thing to think about is do a little podcast, bring on other cancer survivors, bring on some of the businesses. People love being interviewed. If you want a client, instead of actually trying to pitch the client, bring them onto your podcast and talk to them about like what kind of needs, what sort of productivity are you lacking? How has COVID impacted your business? Do you think that there's some mental health issues? How do you think we could reduce those risks? By the way, some of the services that we're, again, position your less sales and more positioning. And I think that you would be in a better position to get a little bit more experience in talking about your company, a little bit more fluidity in it. And then I think it would be a little bit more convincing to those people with the open up their wallets.
Yeah, podcast is a lot of work. One more thing though, but if you do want to do a podcast, I have all the knowledge on that. We can give you that insight. It is a lot of work. But certainly, to Ray's point, creating your own platform, whether that's a blog, whether that's a group, that can be very, very powerful for sure.
Because you've got such an amazing story. I mean, again, I think it's an authentic story. It's something that is part of the business. It's the reason behind the business without overselling it. I think that it just gives you a little bit more authenticity when it comes to working with clients, as opposed to somebody who's like maybe a kind of, change management person or whoever. Well, let me ask you another question. Who are your main competitors in this? Because that's, I think, an important thing to understand.
We have, I guess there's the world of employee wellness and benefits. So there's a lot of now kind of tech mental health startups connecting people through Slack to therapists, that kind of thing. There's also, there are a few American companies that are really our, the kind of what we aspire to be. So there's a company called Omada Health that operates in the States that is focused on diabetes and weight loss and uses a similar model of kind of B2B with coaching and hardware scales and stuff like that. We really want to be Omada for Europe with a wider holistic whole body focus, not just weight loss and not just diabetes. So we really think there is a gap in the market for that, particularly.
That's your story. This is your story. See?
Yeah.
No, I'm serious. Like, I think, again, figuring out how to position, that's your story. Where do you fit in the marketplace? What is that sweet spot? I mean, I find the same thing when I'm, pitching against big agencies. Why would you want to work with me? And I do have a pitch. And I think it's really important to kind of look at it and say who you are and who you're not. You aren't, I mean, like one of the things that came out and a lot of the sort of brand work that I was doing when I was consulting for some of the bigger fast moving consumer goods companies was the competitors and the competitors you don't know. And the example that was often given was like breweries, right? Like the big breweries like Budweiser or Molson, they're not competing against, like, they don't have to worry about each other. They have to worry about those microbreweries, right? Because they specialize in one or two things. They really know their customers. They deliver a superior product at a more competitive price. They're much more accessible. They seem cooler and hipper, much more flexible. So I think that is something to consider again when you're trying to position yourself. And to Simon's point, get a couple of home runs, win those clients, because no one's going to want to invest in a company that doesn't have a track record already based on, I have this great idea.
Yeah,
and a great personal story. Yeah.
I'll just finalize to say that you're getting a lot of love online too, by the way. People are loving what you're doing, and
great story. It's you've got a great personality and a great personal story, and you just really kind of exude authenticity. So I think that is obviously going to come out in any pitch.
Totally.
It's just making sure that you align all the different parts of your business so that when you get some of those tough questions, which is, this will never work, will it? That you're able to reframe it and risk the whole story.
On the comm side, I would add one bit of experience that I've had, especially when you mentioned earlier about a lack of resources or feeling like you haven't got enough resources. One way is to make sure that when you're focusing in on your communication strategy, that you focus in on what you like to do. So, if you like the idea of doing a podcast, then it won't feel like work and you won't feel strained and it will be enjoyable.
Yeah.
How I feel about it. But I've actually looked at the amount of work involved, the output, is it worth it? But I enjoy it. So I say that about social media channels. Like, I really enjoy TikTok. I enjoy going on that platform. Are you on that platform, Candice?
Yeah.
But anyway, my main point is, I was thinking we could do a duet and I could promote you on there a little bit. But
cool.
The point I'm making is not use TikTok, although I think it's a good platform. Is maybe sometimes it is a question of just picking the things that you enjoy doing. So doing social media isn't the only way to get business. And certainly a B2B, I would argue that it could be a big distraction. If you're after corporate clients, LinkedIn and or direct relationships and hustling with the network you've already got is the best way. Forget social media, forget it. And so, I can see a social media place. I don't know if you follow Humans of New York. Do you?
Yeah.
I love that, but I could see that type of thing for you as almost like maybe a photographer who's a friend, as a hobby. They do the stories of people that have had hope and found hope. I love that whole hope feed. But again, all of these ideas, I think sometimes there's so many things you can do today. The thing to do is back it into like your partner, Christine, what she likes, what you like, and then almost reverse engineer it from Ray's communication strategy back outwards that way, because then it will not be painful. You won't be forcing yourself to do videos if you don't enjoy it, or going on TikTok if you don't enjoy it. I'm doing TikTok videos at midnight because I enjoy it. I'm not thinking, well, I better do that bloody TikTok thing now because someone told me in my strategy that's where my audience is. So here I go doing it. I'm like, it's midnight, I'm going to do a TikTok.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very lucky to have Christine because she has she has 20 years experience in content marketing. So she's like leading the charge on our comms and content strategy. So I'm kind of in her hands, whatever she tells me to do.
Luck is a skill. Remember that. Luck is a skill. And funnily enough, someone just asked me, I'm getting loads of questions and I think we're running out of time, but someone called Bright Eyes, is a big social media influencer on TikTok, is asking, how do you attract the perfect business partner? So actually a good question. How did you find your business partner?
We actually went on the Antler Innovation Accelerator program in London this year. So we started in March, and the whole point of that program is you don't need to come with an idea, and you hopefully meet your perfect co-founder on that program. So they kind of handpick and curate the people who attend. And yeah, that's where we met, which is great. And yeah, I know how hard it is to find a co-founder by yourself in the real world. So I feel very lucky to have met Christine there.
Yeah, well, that you've highlighted for my audience listening as well. You know that there's lots of programs out there these days to get help. You just need to make a bit of an effort. I read on your LinkedIn about how you quit your job to go and do that.
Yes, yeah.
That was quite inspiring, and yeah, I always like the quit the job stories, I must admit.
Yeah.
Going
quit the job before a big pandemic was the.
You know, perfect timing, if you ask me. You know, perfect
exactly.
timing. But,
but actually, it is perfect timing if you look at it from the standpoint of, is there a need in the marketplace for this type of counseling or professional service? I think absolutely. A lot of businesses probably needed it, but they didn't know they needed it.
Yeah.
Now I think there's this awareness of, oh, geez, like our employees, if we want to keep them, we have to be able to kind of make sure that they're, you know, grounded. That, you know, that this is we can outsource all of that to a professional services organization.
Yeah.
And if they're an outsider, they're able to feed back information on, you know, who we're getting and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's wonderful to talk to you both. Ray, thanks for coming on and sharing your knowledge. I know how in demand and how busy you are. So, and Candice, your story is amazing. We're here for you, me, my community, even Ray now. I do see Epic Hope being a big brand. So I'd like to see you do that.
Don't be afraid to reach out.
Yeah, don't be afraid. And all the links for anyone listening, well, for all you guys listening, the links are below to both Candice's business and Ray's business. So I'm sure and they would love to hear from you guys, and please, if you do have any ways you could help either of them or they could help you, reach out. But guys, thanks very much for coming on today and sharing your stories and knowledge.
Thanks
Wonderful.
again, and Merry Christmas.
Yeah. Merry Christmas. Yeah, it's Christmas, crazy, isn't it? Yeah, Merry Christmas. I'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.
There you go, guys. That's our podcast show for today. We're well on our way to helping 1 million people start a business of their own. Even with my dogs barking in the background, hundreds of you managed to stay on and listen, so thank you very much for that. I hope you found the insights useful today. I saw a lot of questions we didn't get to, but I will go and individually reply to those questions now. So thanks for asking them, and I appreciate you guys coming on. If you have knowledge and you want to share it with the world and help people start a business of their own, then reach out to us through simonscribb.com. If you feel that you need some help with your business, either to start it or to grow it, feel free to reach out to us again, either through thepurposefulproject.com or simonscribb.com. We will help you. If you've enjoyed today's broadcast, hit subscribe, do a share so other people can hear it. And don't forget to set the alarm, I think it's called, on most platforms, so that when we go live, you know it. It seems that apparently 72% of people that subscribe to us haven't done that, so you don't know when we go live. So please do that, and do me a big favor. Comment below and let us know if our broadcast today was useful to you and what you would like to hear from us in the future to help make your business life more successful. Have a wonderful day, folks, wherever you are in the world. Enjoy it.